Hey guys, welcome back to Towards FPL. It's Fran here, and I'm back with a rating your FPL drafts video now that we're a week and a half out from FPL, actually officially starting game week 1 coming upon us. These drafts were actually submitted very kindly by some Discord users within our community. You can actually see the Discord link right around where my finger is. And effectively, the Discord community is a great place to talk about the latest news, the latest transfers, any kind of things that we see tactically, and maybe hidden gems as well as people just sharing advice and just talking about football and being kind with each other. So do look out to join Discord if you want to find a nice place to talk about FPL. It's a safe space. So with Allison, I think this is the best part of the draft, to be honest, in terms of the defense. You have these staple options with Cancelo, Trent, Chilwell, Allison. I think there's nothing really faulting that. I do kind of like James because I feel like he's going to be a bit more nailed to start the season, because it seems like Chilwell has gotten a little bit of rest and rotation, and it might be the case that Tuchel's actually trying to rest Chilwell, who's coming back from quite a severe injury. What I don't really like about the defense, though, is Zermour and Klein. I think these are 4.5 options that I think you could actually find better options with, or even moving towards a 5.0 option such as Gabriel, and then going for a 4.0 option like Nico Williams. I just feel like Klein is someone who's like an attacking fullback who doesn't actually provide too much in terms of attacking play. I think what you can see as well from Crystal Palace last season is that the fullbacks weren't actually that involved in open play. And for me, that's the actual entire value of going for a fullback in FPL. Otherwise, you're actually better served with maybe going for a center back like Gabriel or like Lewis Dunk, who could actually provide you with headers and points through that kind of basis. If you give a comparison to someone like Tomiyasu, who played for Arsenal, he was actually one of the fullbacks who actually tucked in quite often, whereas Tierney was the more aggressive one. And you can actually see the point disparity in their points per game as a good reason to say no real point in looking at a fullback who's going to play mostly defensive. And I think that's kind of Klein's role in this Crystal Palace team. Was there more? As I said, I think I'm just not really a huge fan of betting on championship defenses moving up, even if they performed previously well. I think I thought the same as well of Travers, for example, as a goalkeeper option in FPL this year. I just feel like it's a lot safer to go tried and tested, and maybe if you're going for safer options, because I would consider Klein to be actually quite a safe option. He's high differential, but he's actually quite safe because I don't really see his ceiling being high. I think they're just better options. Like, you could even tempt yourself with someone like Saliba at 4.5. Or, as I said, move into a 5.0, 4.5, 4.0 backline so that you actually have one playing player and not necessarily the need to rotate constantly. In the midfield, I think Hwang's an interesting option now that Jimenez is injured for 8 weeks. Still don't really like him as a pick, though. I just don't think he's shown enough last year. You have better options, in my opinion, that are cheaper as well within Podence and Neto. Definitely, I'd probably be tempted to go for one of them, especially now that they could be playing out of position and actually taking up one of those spots that Jimenez will leave. As far as Bissouma and Bentancur, no real reason for me to actually go for these options. I'd actually much rather you go for options like Bailey or even Almiron at 5.0 and actually save yourself some money by pushing into a Spurs defender, in my opinion. At that sort of price, you could be looking at someone like Doherty or Perisic, in my opinion. As far as MacArthur, same sort of logic there. I'm not really sure what the idea behind this draft is, unless it's like a very, very early bench boost, but I still think it's super hard to get out of this draft in this situation. So I feel like that's why I'd probably move away from it. I just think it's too tough. You have around 5 options in this draft here, just within Zamura, Bissouma, Bentancur, MacArthur, and Klein, that I wouldn't really be happy to start the season with. Werner and Iheanacho, same sort of similar things. I feel like the coach from both teams doesn't necessarily rate both of them. I think Iheanacho was a player who actually at the end of last season once again had a little bit of a spurt, but he was never really consistent last year, and I really expect Vardy to start. I don't think Iheanacho will play a starting role, so I think once again he is, even though he's cheaper this year, not really an interesting option. Haaland is a very, very formidable forward. Nothing really wrong with that, but I would actually probably say that this draft is a little bit weaker just because it's too well-rounded in a sense, has too many box-to-box midfielders and defenders that I don't think actually provide that much within their tactical structure. So I'd probably actually give this draft a 4 out of 10, unfortunately. The next draft is actually coming from user MCL. I actually think this is a fantastic draft. The backline is really, really deep. You are actually going and avoiding Cancelo, but I generally think that, even though the community might not agree, going for a double city defense that doesn't incorporate Cancelo could actually pay off. Ultimately, when you look at Cancelo last year, yes, he was one of the best defenders in FPL by far, in terms of pure points, but if you actually look at points per game, he's actually a lot closer to options like Diaz and Laporte than you'd think. So I therefore think that if you'd like to cut some money from the defense and you still want to go premium, Diaz is a great option. For me, Gabriel's a great punt. I sort of discussed how interesting he'd be as an option to punt around, because I like the upside that you get over Crystal Palace and Leicester, who are one of the worst set piece defenses that we saw in the previous year, as opposed to going for someone like Zinchenko, who a lot of people will be going for, but I don't think necessarily provides too much in terms of expected points and expected assists, that kind of area of the field. As far as the midfield, it's interesting because you actually have this double 8.0 structure here, so it does allow you a lot of flexibility to move in between options like Saka and Kulusevski as well. The other thing I would say is this draft does seem to lack triple Arsenal. I know it might be a little bit FOMO to go into triple Arsenal, but I really think they have some of the best fixtures available, and they've also backed it up with really fantastic preseason form. And we also know from last year that when they actually have Partey and Xhaka in that structure in the midfield, and they have a defense put together that doesn't include Nuno Tavares, I really think Arsenal have the groundwork to actually beat a lot of the mid-table teams and below. So I really do like going for a triple Arsenal draft. That's perhaps the only thing I'd criticize here. Nothing really wrong going for Luis Diaz. I think he's a great alternative to Robertson. I can understand going for that flexibility in the midfield. The only thing I'd probably dislike about this draft is Solanke, but ultimately there's going to have to be someone who makes way, right? A lot of our template draft structures include someone like Jesus, who's probably going to be Mason Mount within this team when we're thinking about money and how we spend it correctly. And perhaps if you'd like to gamble in Chelsea, that could be interesting. I think the one thing that's kind of detracted me from going double Chelsea early on this year is just the preseason form and the fact that they haven't really finalized a lot of the transfers, so they haven't really had much time to gel as a team, which worries me a little bit, even though their fixtures are so sweet. I'd actually give this draft probably an 8.5 out of 10. The third draft is going to come from Arte, who's coming all the way from Australia. So thank you so much for providing this draft. One thing I would actually say about this team is it's flexible in that it's a 4-4-2, but I do think that too much budget cutting has actually happened within the defensive positions. I don't really like going for Nico Williams as a starter. I really think he has to absolutely be on your bench. I would only really consider him to start in game week 3 personally, in different variations of drafts that I've seen around the world. As far as White and Ederson, I think there could be an alternative there where you could go for Walker and Ramsdale, but I think this is totally fine. It's a good way to sort of, I think, approach the Arsenal defense, especially since he has been playing right back at some times. He does kind of tuck in like Tomiyasu, so I don't really expect too many attacking returns from right, if we're being completely honest. But if we move on to the midfield, I do like, once again, the flexibility of the 8.0s, and it's a very, very template frontline forward pairing of Kane and Jesus, which is fantastic. The one thing that I would say is I do think a little bit money has to be squeezed back into the defense. Mount and Foden, for me, do hold up a lot of money, and I know Bailey is really great as a cost cutter here, as a 5.0 option, someone who Gerrard seemed to be very, very interested over, but I would probably prefer going for someone like a Mount or a Foden, picking one of the two, and then actually moving into some of the cheaper midfielders that we have. I still think that we have fantastic value within options like some of the 6.0 options like Martinelli, or even pushing up to the 6.5s. You can go for someone like Rashford. I know you're probably going to be a Liverpool fan, which is why I can see a distinct lack of Man United, but I do think there's a bit of upside there, especially if you want to play aggressive in the early game weeks to maybe even move into a United player. Otherwise, I think this is a very, very solid draft. I'd probably give this an 8 out of 10. The next draft is going to be from City Ofek, so probably going to be a City fan here. A distinct lack of City in the team, though. Only Mahrez being there. And I think Mahrez is an interesting punt. I did see Dan Bennett on FPL Focal's channel actually feature his team selection, and it did include Mahrez, so that's an interesting punt to go for. Now kind of hedging that Mahrez would play right wing because of the transfer outgoings. Is this the season that Mahrez is actually a great option starting from game week 1? I'd probably say no, but I can't hate the punt, and I think even Grealish is an interesting punt to start the season off with. Going back to some of the advice that I previously gave with some of the drafts, I'd say Tomiyasu is not too interesting as a draft. I think he's probably his injury situation. I think his also lack of availability, similar to Tierney, is something that kind of puts me off him quite a bit. I'd much rather you go for someone like Ben White, who has shown that he can play a full season without getting too injured. And the same thing with maybe even going for a punt like Saliba or Gabriel, if you can actually push a little bit of money in different places. As far as triple Liverpool, that is covered. This is one of the drafts that does incorporate a 4-3-3 structure with Darwin Núñez. Núñez is quite expensive, but I can completely understand going for a little bit of a Núñez punt at the start. If you have been excited by his preseason form, it has been, I think, a case of highs and lows. But I do actually expect Darwin Núñez to actually start the season in that striker position alongside Luis Diaz playing on the left. So hopefully that punt can work out, especially as an aggressive gamble. Jesus is once again another fantastic pick, and it does cover your Arsenal bases here. Very, very template kind of front line with Kane and Jesus, but I do like Darwin Núñez to kind of offset that as well. Bailey and Salah, nothing to really complain about here. I guess what's lovely about this draft is it does have the flexibility to move into alternating kind of 8.0 other options. And the only thing I'd say here is I'd probably say be a bit more confident in your own team, be a bit more confident in City. I do think there's really, really good fixtures for City. I'd probably want to start my draft at least with 2 City options. So if you could actually maybe squeeze out someone like a Trippier or Perisic for them, I just think there's much more guarantees there. Ultimately, Trippier has some tough games to start off with. He does play Liverpool and City in his first 5 games. And as far as Perisic, we still haven't seen enough preseason minutes for him to actually say he makes a lot of sense to start our teams with. So I'd probably think about trying to squeeze a City option into this team if possible. And if you can't find a way to do that, then maybe moving a little bit of a template transfer would be going from Darwin Nunez to someone like a Luis Diaz to save yourself a little bit of money, but it's up to you. If you do want to go for that gamble of that upside of Darwin Nunez and move away from options like Luis Diaz, which everyone seemed to be going as a default alternate, or even Robertson, then fair play to that. I'd probably give this draft a 7 out of 10. The next draft is going to be from H. Giotti. So Meslier is one of those fantastic 4.5 keepers that I think a lot of people are slightly sleeping on. Yes, I know Leeds were abhorrent last year from a defensive point of view, but they have made a lot of transfers, which is a really positive sign, in my opinion, of what Leeds could be, especially now that they have a full preseason under their belts. One thing that I think is a little bit alarming from the outside is James and Chilwell. I wouldn't be super confident going for double Chelsea defense. Yes, it was absolutely banging last year when both James and Chilwell were in form and when Chelsea had a great run of games at the start. But what concerns me right now is the preseason hasn't gone great. This isn't a Chelsea team that's coming back from a Champions League win fresh with confidence. I think this team is a little bit disorganized, and I would say the same has been kind of supported by even Tuchel himself, who hasn't been very positive about his team and their displays as of late. Neto is a great option. We did discuss the Jimenez injury, but I think a lot of people have been showing the stats for Neto, and it hasn't really been too different or too dissimilar when Jimenez is on or off the field. So if you'd like to keep Neto in your team, that's totally fair. I think the rest of the team is extremely template. It is fantastic, though. I would probably recommend going for one of those interesting Spurs options, or even to double up on a City defense if possible at that sort of price range, which is James and Chilwell, just because I have a little bit more confidence in City's performance in that front 8-game swing as opposed to Chelsea at this point in time. But otherwise, I would say this is actually going to be a 9 out of 10 draft. It's template, it's simple, but it's something I can't really criticize too much. I just missed actually that you are going for a Haaland captaincy. So once again, quite a big punt on the West Ham game. Hopefully the Community Shield will actually put a little bit of light and shed a little bit of light, on Haaland's performances and whether he's able to stay fit and whether he looks fit enough to actually play 90 minutes. So hopefully you'll kind of tailor your captaincy option based on that. But otherwise, this is looking like a fantastic draft, and good luck to the captaincy differential. The last draft that we're actually going to look at for now is going to be Geechee's draft. I just wanted to show a large variety of drafts and just talk about my general thoughts and feelings. This is a very Man United centric draft, and I do like the upside in going for and gambling for Man United because they do have reasonably good games. And if you are going for an extremely aggressive wildcard, I mean, you could even wildcard at game week 3 if it doesn't seem to pan out very well. Here, I think the only thing I would actually dislike about this draft is going for Bruno Guimaraes and going for Jose Sa. Yes, Jose Sa had a fantastic defensive season last year, but it seems like in the preseason that they are attempting to play a little bit more of an offensive style. Whether they actually end up doing that at the start in game week 1 is a different question, but I wouldn't really like playing with that sort of probability in my head of whether Wolves are actually going to play a much more defensive style this season as opposed to the offensive style that they've shown so far in the preseason, where they actually have conceded quite a fair bit of goals, in my opinion. So that's why I wouldn't really be super high on Jose Sa to start. I do like options like Johnny or Ait-Nouri, or even going for Kilman at 4.5, because it does give you a little bit of cost saving on the Wolves defense, and I just think that you want to squeeze that 0.5 somewhere else if possible, and that's probably going to be over someone like Bruno Guimaraes. I just don't like Bruno as a box-to-box mid. I think, yes, on a select game week where you kind of see an opportunity for Bruno to strike, that'd be great, but I think as a consistent FPL option, I really don't see him as being an asset that I'd like to start my season off with. If anything, someone like Almiron has started preseason fantastically, and you might want to pivot into him if you really wanted to go for a Newcastle attacker just to start the season off with, especially someone who's shown form. I know Bruno showed a lot of form at the end of last season, but if we're contextualizing preseason as well, then maybe Almiron's actually a better punt. The rest of the team is very template. It does feature the sort of Kane Jesus front line, and it's very interesting to see that a lot of drafts are now featuring more Kane than Haaland, whereas if you look at the FPL website, the ownership does show a lot more Haaland than we'd expect. Once again, this is a draft that features Luis Diaz as opposed to Robertson. No real complaints there. I do think this is, once again, a different sort of strategy by managers, and people can play around the comfort of defense and playing a much more stable defense, or also playing a much more flexible attacking structure, which incorporates maybe a potential rotation of the 8.0 options. And I do like that if that is your strategy. So I would actually probably give this draft an 8 out of 10, just because I'm not a huge fan of Bruno. And I think if you do shift him out and maybe even Sa as well, I think this could be a fantastic draft. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching the video. Apologies to Reina for rating that draft poorly. I just didn't really like the structure there because there were so many box-to-box mids that I think really don't actually pan out in FPL as much as you'd expect. So I'd prefer going for a much more stable structure, which incorporates using as much money as possible outside of the bench and making sure that that's actually poured over to the starting 11 so that you can actually reap the benefits of the early game weeks, unless you were going for a bench boost. But even if you were to go for a bench boost, I'd make sure that the players who are on my bench are as rotatable as possible, as opposed to people who'd be holding too much money in my team, such as MacArthur, such as Bentancur, so on and so forth. So anyways, thank you guys so much for watching the video, and I'll catch you guys tomorrow for an interesting preseason recap video.